Hi folks, HR Funk out here on a dark and stormy day here in Ohio, which is pretty much the defining description of our spring in 2019. Let me apologize ahead of time for any wind noise that comes through on this video, but the wind is gusting out here on the range today, and I have a feeling you're going to hear some of that on your end. But I'm out here today to bring you the 7th state qualification course in my series on law enforcement qualification course challenge videos. Now, as many of you know, I'm attempting to fire a law enforcement firearms qualification course from each of the 50 states, and today our course comes from the Sooner State of Oklahoma. Now, as I've said before in past videos, if you have access to your state's law enforcement firearms qualification courses, and if you can get me copies of those courses, and particularly if you can get me a target or two, that's fantastic. Let me know in the comments section, and I'll let you know where to send those materials to. But for today, we're going to take a close-up look at the Oklahoma course and see how it does against our challenger, which I'll introduce in just a minute. Before I get to today's course, there's something I want to make you aware of with regard to this series that I'm going to be adding. And this actually came as a result of a viewer suggestion, and I thought it was a pretty good one, and that is to evaluate these courses as I go and ultimately select the best law enforcement firearms qualification course. What I'm going to do in an effort to do that is in each group of 10 states, or when I complete each group of 10 states, I'm going to go back and look at all 10 of those courses that I fired, and I've come up with a set of 21 different criteria that a shooter can be evaluated on during the course of a firearms qualification. I'm going to compare each one of those courses to that list of 21 criteria and see which one meets the most of those requirements or the most of those criteria, and try to use that as an objective way to select the best course of that previous group of 10. When I get done with all 50 states, I'm going to look at my 5 winners from each of those groups of 10 and evaluate them with that same set of 21 criteria and pick what I think is the best law enforcement firearms qualification course of the country. And I'll make that known when I get done with all 50 courses. Now, as I said, with regard to the courses, I'm going to try to be very objective in my selection of the best of each group of 10 and ultimately the best course in the country. Also, just for fun, I'm going to select my favorite firearm from each group of 10 as I work my way through all the qualification courses of the country. And at the very end, I'm going to select my favorite firearm from all 50 that I use throughout the course of these qualification videos. Now, for the firearms, I'm going to allow some subjectivity on my end with regard to selecting my favorite. Since I'm using historical firearms and I'm using revolvers and things like that, I'm not using the latest state-of-the-art firearms. I'm not going to try to actually name the best firearm based on any objective criteria. Rather, I'm just going to pick my favorite one of the group, and I'll make it known what it is or what reasons that I select that particular firearm. But I thought that would add a little bit more fun to these videos, and also, when we get all the way done, I can go back then and look at the different courses and again judge them or compare them against each other and try to pick which one I think does the best job in evaluating an individual shooter's skills with regard to being a law enforcement officer and the duties that are required of that individual. And here's today's qualification course. As I said in the introduction, this course comes from the state of Oklahoma, and this is the Oklahoma Law Enforcement Handgun Qualification course. The Oklahoma course requires a shooter to fire 25 rounds, and it's divided up into stages that take place at 25 yards, 15 yards, 7 yards, 3 yards, and then a final stage that takes place 3 feet from the target. In order to be considered qualified at the end of the course, the shooter has to have 72% of his or her shots in the proper area on the target, which means 18 of those 25 rounds that he or she fires have to be in the proper scoring area. It's going to be difficult to see in the video, but there is a circle around the torso of the target here, and in order for a shooter's shots to count, they have to be inside of or at least touching that circle. Now, there is one stage that requires a headshot, and there is a circle here in the face of the target and that shot has to be either inside of or at least touching that circle in order to qualify. Each shot that a shooter fires is worth 4 points. So as I said before, if all 25 rounds are in the proper area, the shooter can achieve a score of 100%, but 4 points are deducted for each shot that is outside of those proper scoring areas. And ultimately, if the shooter misses more than 7 shots, he or she will not qualify on this course. Now, there are no special qualification categories. There are no expert sharpshooter or anything like that. So again, this is one of those courses where at the end, a shooter is either qualified or not, depending upon whether he or she achieves a score of 72% or higher throughout the course of the qualification. And without further ado, here is the challenger for today's law enforcement qualification course video. It is my 1966 vintage Smith & Wesson Model 28 Highway Patrolman. I'm going to be shooting the Model 28 today with full power 158 grain 357 Magnum ammunition, so it's going to be a wild ride as I shoot my way through this Oklahoma handgun qualification course. And here we go, folks. The first phase of the Oklahoma handgun qualification course takes place at a distance of 25 yards from the target, and it's divided into 3 separate phases, each of which require the shooter to fire from a position of cover behind a barricade. The first stage starts out with the shooter in a kneeling position, and on the signal to fire, the shooter draws and has 5 seconds to fire 2 shots into the body of the target. Time then stops, and the shooter stands, and again, on a signal to fire, has 5 more seconds to fire 2 shots into the body of the target. The final phase of this stage of the course takes place on the left-hand side of the barricade, and it's identical to the phase that was fired on the right-hand side. On the signal to fire, the shooter has 5 seconds to fire 2 shots into the body of the target. Now, interestingly, there are a couple of things that are a little bit different on this course than some of the others that I've fired to this point. For one, in the Oklahoma course, it specifies that the shooter can use the barricade for support while firing from this distance. Also, all the phases are fired with the firearm in the shooter's right hand. So when I go to the left-hand side of the barricade, I'll still be using my right hand to fire the revolver, but I'll be using the barricade for support. Only the first stage, when the shooter is in kneeling position, starts with the revolver in the holster. After that, both standing stages start with the revolver in the shooter's hand in a ready position. Once I fire the third phase of this course, that finishes the 25-yard phase, and then I'll move to 15 yards for the next phase of the course. And there's those first 6 shots from 25 yards, folks. All of them well within this torso circle. So those are all good shots. Those are all qualifying shots, and each one counts as 4 points. So now I'll move on to the next stage and see how I do there. And I'm ready for the next stage of this Oklahoma handgun qualification course. This stage takes place at a distance of 15 yards from the target, and I want to read the special instructions for this stage from the course description. And what it says is, on command, walking forward in unison, scanning left and right for additional threats, students will advance from the 25-yard line to the 15-yard line while presenting from a ready gun position. Targets shall not be turned until the students arrive at the 15-yard line. Upon arriving there, the student will fire 1 round from a standing position and 1 round from a kneeling position in a time limit of 6 seconds. Now, I did get a little bit of clarification on this stage, and as I understand it, the movement is really for administrative purposes and safety purposes when you have a lot of officers on a firing line. So they are moving from the 25-yard line to the 15-yard line all at once. They added having the firearm in the ready position and scanning for threats just to give it a little bit more tactical context. So I am going to do that so that I'm following the special instructions for the stage, but what I'm going to do when I get to about my last step and arrive at the 15-yard line, I'm going to push the button on my timer so it will then randomly signal me to fire and give me a 6-second time limit to fire one shot standing and then one shot kneeling from that distance of 15 yards. And on we go, folks. The next stage of the Oklahoma qualification course takes place at a distance of 7 yards from the target. And this time, on the signal to fire, I have 4 seconds to draw and fire 4 rounds into the body of the target. The revolver starts out secured in the holster. I have to get a good draw and fire 4 accurate shots into the body within that time limit of 4 seconds. Oh, and I pulled one shot out on that one. I was pulling them all low and to the left. I'm sure that was me anticipating that recoil a little bit and pulling them out of there, and that one made it outside of the torso line. So, with 2 stages left, I've got 1 shot outside of the proper area. I'll see if I can keep the rest of them in there. And I'm now up to a distance of 5 yards from the target. This stage of the course is very similar to the last stage in that it requires 4 shots to be fired in a time limit of 4 seconds, but this time I have to fire 3 shots to the body and 1 shot to the head, all within that 4-second time limit. So we'll see how I do on this one. And there we go. That was better than the last stage. All the body shots are in the proper place. The headshot is in the proper place. It's actually touching the line right there. So that one counts. Now I'll move on to the 5th stage of this Oklahoma qualification course and give that a try. And I'm ready for stage 5 of this course. And this is a drill that I've not seen before in a qualification course. What I'm going to do on the signal to fire is draw and fire 3 rounds with a 2-handed hold into the body of the target. Then I have to transition to my weak hand and fire 3 rounds weak hand only, and that entire exercise has to be performed in a time limit of 6 seconds. It takes place at a distance of 3 yards from the target, so I'm relatively close, but the thing that I notice is transitioning the big heavy Model 28 from my strong hand to my weak hand actually takes a little bit of coordination, and trying to get it in within this 6-second time limit, I think, is going to be a little bit of a challenge. Last stage of the course, folks. This one takes place at a distance of 3 feet from the target, and on the signal to fire, I have to draw, come to a close quarter retention position, and fire 3 shots into the body of the target in a time limit of 2.5 seconds. Now, this distance-wise is not difficult, but I'm going to be drawing this 6-inch Model 28, which requires a little bit of movement to get it out of the holster and on target, and then dealing with the recoil of this full-power .357 Magnum ammunition. So getting all 3 of those shots off in a time limit of 2.5 seconds is going to be just a little bit tight. I think I can do it. Let's see how it goes. Time was 2.23 seconds, all 3 shots off, all 3 shots on target. And if you could see the peppering from the powder on this target, it's pretty interesting just to see what this .357 Magnum does just with the velocity of the powder granules at this distance. Time for the tail of the target, folks. Of the 25 rounds that I fired during the course of this Oklahoma handgun qualification, all but 1 are within the proper scoring areas. This 1 shot that I fired from 7 yards made it out. The rest of them are all in. The headshot counts. It tried to make it out, but it is touching the line right there, which according to the course description means it counts for 4 points. So numerically, I ended up with a 96 out of 100, which is a qualifying score under the Oklahoma standards. And the course was interesting. On paper, it looked easier than it was to shoot it, and a lot of that had to do with the very tight time constraints as I got closer and closer to the target. This 1 shot that I pulled out from 7 yards really was because I was firing so quickly. I think with a smaller, lighter firearm that generated less recoil, this would have been easier than it was with the Model 28, but even so, the Model 28, all these years later, still was capable of meeting the Oklahoma qualification standard. So, once again, we see an old-time revolver that still makes the cut based on the modern-day standards. Another interesting departure for this Oklahoma course is it's the first one I've seen from any of the 7 states that I've done so far that did not require a mandatory reload during one of the drills. I find that odd, and I'm curious as to why the folks from Oklahoma would not have reloading. I assume reloading is done in practice and in training, but they just don't include it as one of the criteria in the qualification course. In any regard, that is a departure from what I've seen with the courses from other states in the country. And that's the video, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. That's 7 states down, 43 still to go. I'll be out the next time with a new course from a new state and a different firearm, and we'll see how that one goes. For now, if you have any questions or comments about the Oklahoma course, be sure to forward those to me as always. And until next time, good shooting. Bye-bye.